Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to a press conference today to talk about the city's budget. Obviously, the city isn't immune from the impacts of COVID-19. The loss of revenue the city has suffered from facility rentals, recreational programming, parking, gaming have all had a significant impact on the city. And unlike the federal and provincial governments, we are not by law allowed to operate or run deficits. Hard and difficult decisions had to be made around staffing and programming. Prime example, of course, is the fact that in excess of 200 city staff have been impacted. These include full-time, part-time, and contracted persons, and the city well appreciates what that means for them and their families as they faced a significant adjustment in their own lives that hopefully will be a temporary one. We have adjusted this year's property taxes down from 5.2% to 4.5%. As a municipality, we must provide core essential services such as good governance, fire and police services, and continue to maintain our over $3 billion in infrastructure assets. This includes city-owned roads, drainage, vehicle fleet, facilities, parks, land, and open spaces. It also includes the sanitary sewer system and the entire water supply, treatment, and distribution system. It is unclear to us, as it is to you, how long this pandemic will impact the city and how it will continue to impact the city potentially in 2021 and beyond. The 4.5% increase in general property taxation gives the city room in the Special Initiatives Reserve to fund any potential shortfalls in the 2020 fiscal year and revenues that flow from it, or any costs incurred from the closure of facilities as a result of COVID-19. It will also give Council greater flexibility in setting the tax rate for 2021, which we hope will lessen the financial impact of property owners. Another measure Council has taken to reduce pressures to residents and businesses has been to push back the penalty date for late property tax payments to October 1st, 2020. I encourage every one of you who has the ability to pay your taxes by the due date, July the 2nd. But if you can't, there will be no penalty charged on the late payment until after October the 1st, 2020. But if you pay your taxes on time, it provides the opportunity for the city to maintain its cash flow to provide the critical services I've just discussed. We are looking at our capital infrastructure projects that we can help stimulate our local economy. Such investments have a rippling effect, allowing local companies, perhaps like yours, to remain open, members of the community, perhaps like you, to continue to be employed, and for those that can, to purchase the products or services which in turn have a positive impact on our other industries in our community. We are in this together, and never before in probably many, many years, or certainly in my lifetime, have we been so conscious of the importance of our local economy and supporting local businesses. We don't know if there'll be a second wave of COVID-19 in the fall and what impacts it will have on us as a community or as a nation. We don't know if the current financial supports provided by the federal and provincial governments will in fact continue, whether they'll be in a position to continue. So we need to prepare and plan on how we can weather this storm together until a vaccine is created and we can put what has been the strangest and most remarkable and often distressing period of most of our lives behind us. As some of you know, Councillor Brown and I are co-leading the Mayor's Task Force on Resilience and Recovery to help position Nanaimo for a rapid economic recovery. The task force will provide strategic recommendations to Council, which will inform our forthcoming 5-year fiscal plan and align with our current adopted strategic plan. It will work in collaboration with public bodies, private institutions, and community organizations to build local resilience. It'll work in collaboration with the business community and other community organizations to identify immediate economic strategies for local recovery for our residents, our businesses, and our community organizations, who likewise are suffering now. Let us not pretend for a moment the donations to all those valuable nonprofits aren't suffering as well. It will also help develop a plan for the coordination and implementation of recovery and relief efforts to support the community through the COVID-19 pandemic and its recovery process. And finally, it will identify and support community-driven ideas and solutions to assist in the recovery process, including the design and implementation of activities and programs. Like each and every one of you, I well appreciate the impact the virus has had on you and your families. None of us have a life that hasn't been impacted. Whether we are separated from loved ones we can't see or shouldn't see, whether it's as simple a thing as being able to get a haircut or obtain professional services, whether it's obtaining necessary medical services, whether you've been waiting for an elective surgery, perhaps for a very long time, which has now been postponed in order to keep our hospitals free to deal with the COVID crisis, whether you've had to shut the doors on a family business that's been around for a long time, you've suffered a loss of your own job, or significant reduction in your employment, we get it. We are in this together, and it is for those reasons that the task force was created. It is for those reasons that we have taken the financial decisions we have as council with respect to this upcoming budget. It's for those reasons that we've chosen to postpone the penalty date on late tax payments. It is because we get it, we understand. We know that we are in this together, but likewise, as we are in it together, we will come out of it together. It is going to take a while. We don't know what the future looks like for sure. But this community has been through tough times before. As I reminded many of you just a little while ago, when the Esplanade mines 1 and 2 blew up and 149 miners were killed and one rescue worker for a total of 150, we had 2,000 people in this town, and we pulled through then. We're going to pull through again. Happy to take questions.
Okay, we are going to start by order of who I have on the list here. We're going to start with Lisa from Chile. Lisa, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, I have. Thank you very much. I wanted to talk about the Schedule A regarding the 5-year plan. And I just want to make sure I understand some numbers here. At the bottom, it says transfer between funds, $34,787,014 million. Does that mean you are borrowing close to $35 million this year?
I think the numbers you're referring to are in fact transfers from reserve funds. The city statutorily, as is every municipal government, required to maintain reserve funds for various purposes. In addition, the city has some reserve funds it's set up for itself over a long period of time so that we can spend money when we need to spend money on those vital services that keep the city running. I believe that's the figure you're referring to. I can't pretend that I have the budget sitting here in front of me and can quote you chapter and verse, but we certainly have staff available for a very detailed question if you wish.
Okay, well, from what I can glean from this document, basically what you're taking in revenue, and you track your operating expenses for the year, you actually have a surplus of $12 million, almost $15 million. But the capital expenditures will end up costing the city the need to borrow or transfer funds or whatever of the amount of $35 million. So I'm wondering if you can speak to, in this climate currently, whether the city should be borrowing that much money for capital projects.
As a general proposition, I think I can safely say that Council takes the view that it is precisely during a time of economic crisis when you should be engaging in capital construction. Capital construction historically, economists recognize this and have recognized it over and over again, contributes the most return to the local economy in terms of employment, reinvestment, and taxation revenue for all levels of government. In terms of borrowing, our budget, as you know, as I explained earlier, is in fact a balanced budget. We have capital monies that we for longer term and larger projects may borrow over the longer haul, but we have sufficient revenues to meet those payments. That's all part of the budgeting process. Our budget is, roughly $200 million this year, including both some capital expenditures and, of course, the ordinary operating expenditures. In other words, the groceries and keeping the lights on.
Okay, we're just going to move on to the next person. Lisa, if there's further questions, I'll come back after we've gone through others as well. Spencer Sturridge from Nanaimo News Now. Or do you have a question for the mayor? Spencer, are you with us? You may want to unmute yourself if you...
Now I am, a slight technical issue. This is a question specifically about the actual budget that we have, because as we know, these discussions are made long before this pandemic was ever on our horizon, when it was a little bit over 5%. So to the mayor and staff, what would you say to residents who are concerned that we have had 2 years in a row of relatively substantial high budget increases each year.
Relatively substantial, I think, is how you tend to look at it. The average house value in Nanaimo is roughly $500,000. The difference between last year's taxes and this year's taxes will amount to $95 per household based on an average value of $500,000. In terms of the previous increase, there was no question. There was 1 year where council raised taxes only by 1%, and I think it's generally accepted and understood that most often in any given year in the last decade plus, the inflation increase alone has been 2%, and that's the general inflation measure, which doesn't account for, frankly, the things that the city has to pay for specifically. We don't buy a lot of groceries, but we do buy a lot of steel pipe. We do buy a lot of concrete. We pay for things that, in fact, have increased much higher and more quickly than the general inflation rate, including wages and other benefits that are payable to people who provide contractual services to the city or contractors who deliver projects for the city. So when you look at the context of the value of the property and the actual dollar increase, you can say 5.2 sounded like a big number, but that was based on original estimates. City decisions that have been made with the assistance of staff by council have reduced that percentage amount to 4.5%. So I think we've done a good job in getting the number down, but remember that the number that is important is the actual dollar value that you're paying. It's not the percentage. This is not the best, how shall I say, occasion in which to rely on percentages.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Greg Sakaki from Nanaimo News Bulletin. Greg, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. My question was also regarding capital projects. Recalling the discussion about whether to continue with capital projects. I remember there's general consensus that capital projects would be helpful as far as economic recovery. But what I'm wondering is, was there any consideration of trying to move around timelines or reprioritize the capital projects that were on the list to ones that would be, for lack of a better term, more palatable to taxpayers in a pandemic?
What is it? Everyone is in favor of general economy but specific expenditure. And I think Kenneth, that was John Maynard Keynes meant that we, everybody believes in saving and spending carefully, but they want the things spent on those things that are important to them. Look, in terms of our capital budget, the timing of projects is dependent on a number of factors. Anyone who works in contracting knows this. Availability of contractors to do the work, the bidding process, weather, all of those things. So there will be natural shifts in our capital project approach over the next year. Some projects will finish early, enabling us to get started on others sooner. So we're going to take a very intelligent approach, as staff have done with the support of council through many years in this community. But I want to emphasize to the folks working in this community, we are committed to undertaking those capital projects that generate employment, that generate the success for our local economy as we get through this together. I am not a fan of cutting back on expenditure. That we know historically contributed significantly to the depth and the length of the Great Recession of the 30s and saw Franklin Roosevelt elected in the United States as a result. So are we going to proceed with the things that this city wants and needs? Yes, we are. May there be changes? Perhaps, but we are committed to ensuring our local economy remains as vibrant as possible as we get through this together.
I'm going to go back to Lisa Krudowsko and ask if you have any, Lisa, do you have any follow-up questions for the mayor?
Yes, I do. Just on that topic, how many jobs will this year's capital projects create? And are these jobs, city employees who work on these projects, or are these newly created jobs for others in the community?
I can't give you a specific number of the jobs that will be created. It will depend on the nature of the contracts that are let. Some projects are undertaken by city staff, of course, but many projects are let out for tender and are bid on by private contractors, and the numbers they will bring to the table in terms of employees will be dependent on the nature of the project. That's almost, I hate to say this, an almost impossible question. It's one of those estimates that politicians love to pull out and give you the biggest answer in the world, but I'm not going to do that. What I can tell you is that the capital expenditure is good for the city, and it's not going to be spent on projects that haven't, how shall I say, been the result of a great deal of discussion by council and requests by the citizens of this community over time.
Spencer Sterrett? Lisa, I'll come back.
Okay.
I'll come back to you. Spencer, do you have a follow-up question for the mayor?
I do. Slightly a follow-up on that one, on a very specific type of job, that being managers and directors. We know from the previous administration there were significant gaps in terms of city employment, folks who are fielding major departments. With this budget, if you could just refresh us on what money are there included for new managers to bring, the business of the city back up to where it should be.
I think I can turn to Mr. Rudolph and say that we still haven't filled all of the positions in the city. We still have some difficulty attracting employees and qualified employees to fill those positions. Certainly we have, and we also face the difficulty of COVID as well. So that makes it harder rather than easier to deliver city services. But in response, the city has also stepped up the, I'll call it the electronic process in terms of dealing with city projects, applying for permits or whatever the case may be. So we're managing as best we can. Would we prefer to be staffed up better at certain levels? Absolutely. If you can find a building inspector available, please send them to City Hall, for example. But that is just the nature of the time we're in, and I don't expect there's going to be significant change in the very near future, but we're doing what we can, and our Human Resources Department is certainly advertising. We've advertised several city positions in the last few weeks, and those will hopefully close with successful applicants.
I'm going to move to Greg Sakaki. Greg, are you still with us?
Yeah, still here.
Do you have a follow-up question?
I did have another question, but it's not necessarily related to this, so maybe I'll leave it till the end.
Perfect, thank you. Lisa, I know you had a follow-up question that you wanted to ask. It sounded like it. Did you have
Yes, thank you. Yes, I do. I just wanted to ask about the layoffs. At the beginning of this pandemic, I believe 350 staff and part-time employees and whatnot were laid off. Do you envision at any point rehiring, reinstating these positions within this next budget year?
Look, I'm hopeful that many of these positions and the people who have been impacted by the decision will in fact be back at work at some reasonable time. It's actually a little over 200, it's not 350, but that includes, as I said, full-time, part-time, and contracted workers. For instance, someone who delivers a special class or course at one of our recreational facilities. It includes all those good people who were there at the pools and at the ice arena to look after you and provide and deliver those recreational services. Obviously, if you don't have a pool that's open or an ice arena that's open, you simply do not need the staff to deliver those services. So their hiring or rehiring or coming back to work more properly spoken is going to be dependent on the directions we receive from the provincial health officer. Look, I think one of the reasons this community has done well in terms of its response to COVID-19 is because we took direction from the provincial health officer as a city. We responded appropriately, and it has helped significantly reduce the potential impact on people. On Vancouver Island, I think we're up to 130 cases now. It may be a shade more. Most of those have recovered, and we've had a total, I believe now, of 5 deaths in a population of 800,000. That means a lot of people made a lot of sacrifices in order to keep that death rate low and the spread of the virus so low.
Okay. Spencer, do you have any other questions?
I've got one last question for you here.
Okay.
Given that certainly the forward momentum is keeping going, but some stuff does have to be shuttered off to the side. What projects or initiatives that unfortunately won't be happening this year are you particularly looking forward to having coming back as soon as is possible?
Well, I'd be hesitant, given that we had this discussion in open council yesterday around priorities in terms of capital expenditure. There are a number of projects that the city has been looking at for a long period of time. Whether it's an Oliver Woods-like facility in Chase River area, the south end, whether it's the proposed walkway, the expansion in particular, the leg from Departure Bay itself to the ferry terminal, Improvements on Metro Drive, for instance, are going to go ahead. The first stage of that, which is very important around active transportation. And what we're really looking, though, at projects right now are those that are so-called shovel-ready. In other words, it's there, and perhaps we're in a position, if the federal government and the provincial government continue to loosen the purse strings, to make them eligible for provincial and federal dollars that would assist us in constructing those projects, all for the benefit of our local community. So I'm not going to tell you we're not doing anything in particular, and some, obviously, projects have to be done out of absolute necessity. We have infrastructure to maintain. When I mentioned the figure $3 billion, that wasn't an exaggeration. That's the level of assets we have in this city. That takes a lot of maintenance and repair. As you know, a few weeks ago, there was a major blowout on the line on Bowen Road, and mercifully, because of a quick response from everybody, further damage wasn't done to private businesses in the nearby area. But that's an example of why we have to maintain our infrastructure. It's why Council has, again, included a 1% increase for infrastructure maintenance in this year's budget.
Okay, Greg, I know you have one final question that did not have anything to do with this, but perhaps this is a good time to ask.
Sure. It was just a report that I saw, Councilor. I was wondering if the city was considering closing portions of Commercial Street to help restaurants expand outdoor seating. Is that something that's crossed your desk?
I think. Yeah, I think what I can say at this point is no decisions have been made, but there's certainly been a lot of talk in the community amongst various people and businesses about not necessarily closing Commercial Street entirely, but providing for more patio space for restaurants, perhaps for shops to operate in a more limited fashion, again, subject to provincial direction and regulation. I think we're all anxious to try and ensure that everyone comes through this with the least economic damage, let alone emotional damage. But that means public health is still number one, but we're all of us very conscious at the city. I think of all of us in the city are conscious of those places we used to get a meal or hang out or get a cup of coffee that are facing terrible circumstances. And if we can adjust regulations and perhaps allow expansion for patio service and things of that nature consistent with provincial rules, then I think it's fair to say we're enthusiastic about that, because we know the impact it will have on restaurants. Many restaurants, for instance, have already adapted as best they can by providing delivery services and takeout services that they formerly didn't provide. But that's no substitute for all of us walking through that door or sitting out in a patio table and ordering a meal and perhaps a beverage, enjoying the beautiful sunshine of Nanaimo and spending some money and helping the economy go around.
Well, guys, that's all the time we have. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate in emailing us. We'll be happy to address them then. Unless you have one quick one.
Just one quick one. Just a quick summary, please, of the capital projects that we're working.
Quick summary, at least if we heard you correctly, you're wanting a quick summary of the capital projects that we're working on?
Yes, that have been approved. Is that in the budget that will go ahead this year?
I couldn't give you a list off the top of my head of immediate capital projects that are some capital projects we've already started into this year. I mean, that's the way our budget works. We're already rolling. So in terms of some specific capital projects, I can rely on Ms. Mercer perhaps, or Ms. Fulla to provide a summary.
You might want to refer them to the 2020-2024 financial plan. It is posted online on the city's website, and pages 31 and 32 provide highlights of projects in all the different project categories.
Pages 31 and 32 of the 2020
We'll send you the link. How about that?
financial plan.
That's perfect.
It's all there. We have no secrets at City Hall. We're open and transparent here. But sometimes the CAO has reminded me we're open, we're closed to the public, so to speak, but open for business. We can provide anything electronically or over the phone, and we'll happily do so.
Okay. Thank you. No problem. Thank you again, and that's a wrap.